Let's move over to other news now. Yesterday we heard how the South African Police Service lack of personal equipment and even failure by intelligence contributed to the unrest that took place in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal in July last year. President Cyril Ramaphosa said this during his testimony before the SA Human Rights Commission hearings into the unrest. We are joined by the CEO of the South African Human Rights Commission. Thank you so much for your time, Advocate. We really do appreciate it. I do think let's just start off with the overall view and sentiment that came out of the President's testimony at the hearing. Many say that more should have been done way before we reached crisis mode in July last year. What is your takeaway from what the President had to say?
No, thanks. It was actually important that he was there because, one of the objectives of our inquiry was to try and find out exactly what happened. Why, where were the law enforcement agencies? Because in terms of the Constitution, the police and other law enforcement agencies are responsible to protect our country. And from our view, this unrest should not have happened. It should have been prevented. And even if it happened, the response should have been much better. But certainly, it highlights the problems we have with the law enforcement agencies, which the President himself alluded to. Lack of capacity, lack of intelligence, but also not very good relationships with communities in terms of community policing.
And many would also say that the way the whole thing was handled, especially given the fact that you had Minister of Police, Minister of State Security, Minister of Defence, also needing to come and explain their version and their version of events. Why was it important for these government officials as well as the President to give their version of events? Because I can remember actually when it happened, we were all waiting for some kind of leadership to come out and speak about what's happening and what action is going to be taken. The significance of the President, but also other government officials.
This was certainly one of the biggest tragedies in our country since 1994 in terms of lives lost, as well as the impact on the economy. And the President and government have a duty to protect human rights in our country. And therefore, we had to get an explanation from them as to what has happened, but also what needs to be done to ensure that this never happens again. That's why then we have this hearing and we'll make our own findings and recommendations, which as far as we are concerned are binding and have to be implemented. And we're glad that the President actually, acknowledged and also supported at the hearing, but also said that they are waiting for the report, and they'll definitely look into it and see what could be done to ensure that there is better respect for human rights in our country, as well as respect for the rule of law.
Before we get into the report and when it's going to be released and finalised and the recommendations being binding or not, I want to ask you whether or not it was difficult to get government officials to come and testify before the Human Rights Commission. And even the President, we know, is a very busy man, and many were saying that he needs to answer. Why was he chosen last to testify before the Commission, and what challenges did you face in getting these government officials to be before the Commission?
Well, it was important for him to come last, as the head of state. But certainly there were some scheduling problems. Some ministers were not initially available. That's why we had 3 sittings, in last year as well as in February this year.
Yes, okay. Sorry, I thought you were still going on there. Maybe just speak to us about whether or not, from what you've heard, I know you can't go into depth of what you're expecting the report to find, but do you think there was a failure of law and order, and do you think there was a complete violation of human rights, especially what happened with the looting and so many lives being lost?
No, there was certainly failure by law enforcement agencies, no doubt about that. The testimonies we had from the generals, from the Minister of Police, from the Minister of Intelligence clearly shows that there are massive gaps, which the President himself also alluded to. I mean, for example, we had that in Gauteng you only have about 2 water cannons. So you can imagine if there are protests in many parts of Gauteng, the police will not be able to have non-lethal methods of dealing with that. And we saw last year that with many looting events all over the 2 provinces, the police were unable to effectively stop because the unrest, because they didn't have necessary tools. They only had, they didn't have water cannons to be able to quell this unrest in a much more peaceful manner, to avoid what happened in Marikana many years ago.
And that's why we saw this going on for days on end. I want to speak about criminal action that could possibly be taken and accountability, because it's all good and well to have these inquiries, to have reports after reports saying that what happened should have never happened and certain individuals need to take responsibility. But at the end of the day, South Africans sitting at home are asking what kind of action can be taken, especially from the reports that the Human Rights Commission will come out with.
Certainly both us as the Commission and the President are very clear that those who are behind this unrest, the ringleaders, must be found, they must be prosecuted, and we'll hope that the police and NPA will do their work and will engage with them further. There is no way that we can just let this thing go away. We have lost over 350 lives, we have lost 50 billion to our economy, the rule of law was undermined, the foundations of our constitution were threatened. We cannot let this pass. Those who are responsible have to be brought to book.
Maybe also speak to us about the overall sitting and hearing. Are you satisfied with all those that came to testify? And do you think that you got enough information to come up with a final report?
We've received hundreds of submissions. And of course, many people came forward, ministers. So we're happy really with the response we got. And therefore we'll look into the evidence before us and then make recommendations. As far as we are concerned, our findings are binding, and therefore any organ of state, including the President, will have to implement our recommendations and findings unless they take the report on review.
Do you think that could happen? Do you think anybody would want to take the report on review?
We'll definitely be very surprised. I mean, the President himself yesterday said, they are waiting in a bated breath for the report, and he has actually assured us that they will give effect to this. Now you must remember that in terms of the Constitution, Section 181, all organs of state have an obligation to respect the work of the Commission. It will therefore be an unconstitutional behavior by anybody to just ignore our reports. But secondly, in terms of our own act, the South African Human Rights Commission Act, it's a criminal offence for anyone to undermine the work of the Commission. We have not taken people to court yet, but we will if needs arise.
Certainly. And just lastly, Advocate, maybe just speak to us about when the report is expected and how long it's going to take for you to go through all the evidence that you've received, and when can South Africans actually get a chance or know what's next?
We're hoping by at the latest the end of May. We've had a team of researchers working behind the scenes, writing the reports, so we are quite comfortable that by the end of May the report will come out. South Africans are waiting for a report so that we can actually start healing the land and the people and make sure that what happened really never happens again. I mean, it was quite a worrying concern to see our people looting, destroying property. For what? There are other peaceful means in which we could address our concerns if we had any. But to undermine our economy, look at now we have high levels of unemployment, high levels of poverty. So really we need to be accountable as South Africans if we really believe in the South Africa we love, a South Africa free of violence, and South Africa where there is respect for law and human rights.
Are you expecting any delays, or are you sticking to the deadline of end of May?
We're not expecting any delays. Yeah.
Great. So
we'll make sure our guys...
So we'll call you at the end of May and say, where's the report?
Sure.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for coming through and being patient with us. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
That was the Human Rights Commission CEO, Advocate Sibane. Thank you so much for coming through to studio.